Good afternoon, everyone. It's David Schlotthauer here, back with another detailed tropical weather outlook and discussion for September 1st, 2024 on this Sunday. So taking a detailed look here at the Atlantic Basin here from zoomearth.com, link in the description below this video. And as we can see right now, there are a couple of areas to watch still in the Atlantic. The main area that we're still watching is an area of disturbed weather near the Windward Islands. This is moving to the west at about 10 to 15 miles an hour. We have a new area to watch that is coming off of Africa within the intertropical convergence zone. The West African monsoon extending a little further west this time with southwesterly winds here, with northeasterly winds here. So again, we're seeing this vorticity pocket develop here just to the south of the Cabo Verde Islands. And then, of course, we are still keeping an eye on this area of disturbed weather just off the coast of Louisiana and Texas, where we do have showers and thunderstorms that remain fairly disorganized, but it is worth briefly talking about at the beginning of this video. So the area that we will be briefly discussing here really quickly is this disturbance. This is a closer zoomed in view satellite imagery showing our weather disturbance moving towards these Windward Islands. While there is some decent convection over this system, this remains a fairly disorganized, incoherent circulation type system. We still have winds out of the southeasterly direction here, where we have faster trade winds occurring to the north of this system and what appears to be some arc clouds towards the last few frames of this, which indicates there is some drier air impeding development here. And at the moment, the system does not look very organized at all when we look at the surface wave analysis. In fact, we still have easterly winds here, perhaps out ahead of this. So this is a very disorganized system by all means, and it doesn't look like at any time soon this is going to become a coherent closed circulation as it approaches the northern Windward Islands. But nevertheless, this will still bring impacts to St. Kitts and Nevis, as well as Antigua, as well as Barbuda. If you're in Montserrat, as well as Guadeloupe, Dominica, you might get some inclement weather, some pop-up showers and thunderstorms, but it does not look to be even as extreme as what we had just a few days ago when this was possibly become our next tropical depression over this area, as well as Anguilla, looking like you're going to see maybe a few pop-up showers and maybe some enhanced trade wind flow. But otherwise, this system does not look very impressive at all. But nevertheless, there will be still some impacts with gusty winds, maybe some rainfall, and some very slight elevated surf. This is what it looks like from the National Hurricane Center, our 7-day graphical tropical weather outlook here from Miami, Florida. And it does show that there is still a 40% chance of tropical development as of the 2 p.m. update. But because of our models that I'm about to show you, I would not be surprised if this gets downgraded to a 20 or 30% over the next 7 days. I'm not really going to hype this up anymore, and I'm really going to be more generous because there is so much uncertainty, but we're beginning to figure things out a little bit that this system may not develop at all. Perhaps maybe until we get into the Northwestern Caribbean when this might develop eventually, but I mean, that's if it does at all. And right now, it doesn't look very impressive. Looks very messy, very disorganized, and in fact, there are signs that there is some dry air and a little bit of shear over the system. So really, regardless of development though, this could still bring in some gusty winds and some locally heavy rainfall over portions of the Lesser Antilles on Monday, and then eventually over Jamaica, perhaps on Wednesday and Thursday. And then maybe into the Gulf. We'll see about that as we look at our models. So now, with that being said, here's a look at the latest European model. This is a look at the surface wind plot from the Euro on weatherbell.com. And as we can see here, again, our wave really not organized at all. This is the forecast for 5 o'clock this afternoon Pacific Daylight Time. This would be 8 o'clock Eastern Time. And as we go forward, I mean, the wave really does not look very healthy at all. By tomorrow afternoon, nearly 24 hours from now, the wave looks like this. Really, really disorganized with winds barely 20 miles an hour on the northern side. But again, going to bring in some impacts, some enhanced trade wind showers, some gusty winds, and also maybe some elevated surf. And then going forward here over the next 3 days, this does not look very impressive at all. Based on our satellite imagery, it seems to be more believable from the Euro that this does fail to develop, and then continues to do so once it gets into the rest of the Caribbean. And it's even really hard to figure out where a center here actually is. This is like a trade wind front that is moving through, with enhanced trade winds behind the front, with weaker trade winds in front. So for right now, this looks absolutely disorganized, and we don't even see anything in the next 5 days. And rarely do I go out to 5 days. I'm going to be shortening my forecast here and only go out to about day 7, because even at day 7 here, there is still no development on this model. But that doesn't mean that there won't be. If we take a look at the latest GFS model forecast, we can see it is still picking out this system very neatly, with winds here of about 35 to 40 miles an hour. And when we look at our Canadian model, also not picking up on much of a signal at all. So at the time being of me making this video, I am definitely losing prediction with this, and losing consistency in the models, and therefore there is not much chances of this developing, but there is still that chance that is being 20 to 30% in this video. So right now, maybe some enhanced trade wind showers, some maybe gusty winds, that sort of thing. We're not looking at a tropical storm or hurricane for the time being at all. So now when looking at the European ensemble forecast, all 51 members, we can see a huge difference that 24 hours makes. From yesterday's morning's run, we had a lot of tracks, a lot of major hurricane intensity possible here based on how the wave looked. It looked a little more healthier and looked like maybe it's going to generate more oomph with it, right? But in today's ensemble forecast, this is the September 1st 12Z run, the first ensemble of the month. And we can see, while there is still a signal over here over the extreme northwestern Caribbean, you can see here barely any models picking up, at least in the central Caribbean, of any development, which means this really doesn't have much chance at all until it gets way over here. And I mean, right now, because of the uncertainty here, I would not be surprised if we continue to see downtrends on the ensemble here with our wave right now moving into the Caribbean. Does not surprise me at all. Now, there's a better positioning here of the ensembles with our next wave that's coming off of Africa, but this looks to kind of hang out here and not do much. But eventually, we'll see if this bends back to the west or just kind of stays out to sea. That remains uncertain. But right now, over the next 7 days, there is very little signal here for any tropical genesis, which would take us all the way through at least close to the peak of hurricane season. Which would be very ironic to not see any activity throughout the peak. That's September the 10th. The GEFS ensemble also really has backed off on its prediction. Only a couple of members here indicating a hurricane, with not many members indicating a tropical storm, and just only the majority of the activity is well off, way to the east of the Windward Islands, and it doesn't bother anyone. So for right now, we're not looking at a whole lot of activity out there in the Atlantic, but there are some signs that might change perhaps. We said this 15 days ago, and I will say it again. There might be some changes coming by the middle to the end of September, which I still think we might see a couple of named storms this month, but that could still be on the higher end of the scale based on how the season has really played out since Ernesto. And so the reason why I do see some changes coming by the middle to end of September is, here's a look at the CHI 200 millibar CFS forecast as far as our convective helicity index, how much where there's sinking motion, where there's rising motion. So easy to explain this is there's different thumbnails here. Brown colors indicate subsidence. That is why our waves are having a really hard time developing and may not develop at all. And that continues possibly through the middle of September. This is through the 20th with some sinking air. But once we go into the 21st of September and beyond, we have more rising motion. That is what this forecast calls for, but we have not seen much consistency at all this month or this year so far as how this is going to all evolve. So right now, I am going to be fairly generous, and only marginal development through the middle, the 15th of September and beyond, is still being possible here on these models, with some rising motion back over the Atlantic, Eastern Pacific, and over perhaps maybe the Atlantic. But right now, in the short term, through at least the middle, the 15th of September, we're looking at a fairly unfavorable environment. This seems to also be pretty fitting with our CHI EWP ensemble weather prediction system here. Looking at the forecast, and these are different thumbnails looking at the equator, 20 degrees north, 20 degrees south, and looking basically from Africa over here. I'm going to circle this in black, looking to the east over the Western Pacific, Central Pacific, Eastern Pacific, Central America, and the Atlantic. So I hope that clears up the confusion. So right now, we are moving into a sinking phase of the MJO, so unfavorable conditions are expected to develop over the Atlantic with more Saharan dust, drier air, so very unfavorable, not expecting much at all, other than that one disturbance near the Windward Islands. We still have to watch that, even so models have downtrended today, because they could go the other way in 24 hours. We just don't know, right? But we're beginning to figure that out. By the 18th of September, we start getting some rising motion over the Caribbean and over the Gulf of Mexico. And then the rest of the Atlantic, by the time we go into the 21st, maybe even the 26th of September. And by the time we go into October 1st, we have a lot of rising motion out here. And so maybe the first half of September looks very dead, but we will see if things do wake up by the second half of September, which this season, if it is delayed, it is very delayed by a whole entire month, perhaps. And it's very ironic to start September off with no activity at all versus 2020. We had a lot of named storms, and last year we were tracking like 4 or 5 named storms at once. So this is a huge difference between those 2 years. Now, when we look at the global computer models, once again, the European first and then the GFS model, this is a look at the cyclonic relative vorticity. I did a pretty good job at explaining this in last night's live stream and even the stream before that this is the amount of spin in the atmosphere. So the darker red colors and shading indicate more spin in the atmosphere. This is in the lower half of the atmosphere, so this is at 5,000 feet. And then your lines, these are your thicknesses. This is basically a topographical map of the atmosphere. Ridges with higher heights, troughs with lower heights, more unsettled weather, usually with a tropical disturbance or a trough of low pressure. In this case, over basically the eastern half of Canada. So when we go for, and also your wind barbs to indicate which way the wind is blowing from. So in this case, we got those trade winds that are pretty vigorous coming in out of the easterly direction around this ridge of high pressure in the central Atlantic. So going forward here over the next several days, we can see at the system, nothing really percolates on the European model. I mean, only a little bit of spin here over the Caribbean. I mean, that's not even a disturbance, and only a weak tropical wave. This is in the next 5 days. So after all, looks good for the first half of September, the first week of September, I should say, other than maybe some rain, some gusty winds. We still do have to watch this disturbance to see if it does surprise us down the road, which at this point, it is really devoid of any significant deep convection to really say that this could make a turn, an unexpected surprise on us. But you never know. The atmosphere has played tricks on us so far, and it seems to do that. So going forward now to the end of the model, do I rarely go out to 10 days? And we can see here, while there is some tropical development here, once again, the big issue with these tropical waves are that they are going this way. They are escaping Africa and moving to the northwest. This has been the thing over the last month and a half, where we see these tropical waves try to develop over Africa, then they move offshore, they run into that Saharan dust that is dry, some wind shear, and then they actually go this way. They move to the northwest, and they're not able to develop. So that this is a very ironic, different hurricane season where we are seeing these tropical waves moving off of Africa still at a fairly high latitude. And it is really uncertain if this is going to change at all by the middle of September. There are some signs. When we look at the GFS model, same plot system. When we go forward, there's our deep layer ridge. And please note that the GFS here is being a little bit aggressive. I would bet you $150 or $200 that the GFS goes back to the 06Z run, which was not very optimistic at all. In fact, had nothing there and probably not even a tropical wave on that run. And on this run, we have a little bit of a disturbance. We'll see if the downtrends, if it goes back to that, where it downtrends again. And then going forward in time to the next 10 days here, the GFS not as aggressive as the Euro, indicating maybe a couple of disturbances here, but anything popping, eye-popping or percolating at all. The pattern just not favorable, just not conducive at all for tropical development through the 11th, which, by the way, this is 9/11, and not only that, this is about the peak time of hurricane season, which is officially on September 10th and the 11th, and this is very unusual. This is dead. This is nothing, no brainer, no burger out there in the Atlantic for the peak of hurricane season, and then continuing here even through the 15th. Again, the 15th and before, we're not looking at a whole lot of activity out there. Very stable, nice, good sprawling ridge of high pressure. And again, this is in fantasy land. I want to make it clear, 324 hours out. But the reason why I'm going really far out in time here is to kind of illustrate what the potential this might bring through the first half of September, right? The GFS has done pretty good at not really illustrating a whole lot of development, and that seems to continue. Now, all of a sudden, very late in the forecast here, way far out there on the 16th, we suddenly get tropical development in the Gulf of Mexico. We get another disturbance here, and then we get another disturbance here. Remember that rising motion that does move into the Atlantic or even into the western portion of the Caribbean and in the Gulf of Mexico? Again, this is where this would favor, right over here, all that rising motion building over the Eastern Pacific and even Central America. But that's very far out in time. We've seen a lot of changes, structure changes with the MJO, because the MJO is only one thing, but the interseasonal signal like Rossby wave activity really plays a huge role into this forecast. But the ridge is over here right now, okay, which means we get more sinking motion over Africa and we get more southerly convergence further south here, which then makes perfect sense on why we might see something developing here towards the very end of the GFS. And we go really far out in time and you can see more tropical wave genesis. We got to understand though, in climatological aspect, this is during the peak of hurricane season when things are extremely active for September. So that's why we're not saying that this is a fantasy land model at all, because if we go back one more model run, let's go back here, you can see it wasn't there, but it still hangs on to development there later on in the period in the Gulf of Mexico. But I bet you it's probably not going to happen. The GFS in the short term is going really crazy, and then you can see a system there on the model. So over the last 3 runs, we have seen a signal here of maybe some development beyond the 15th of September, but I'm not putting a lot of sense or money into it for the time being, because right now we're in the sinking phase, the suppressive phase of the MJO, and I just don't feel like things are going to change at least through the 15th or maybe even the 16th of September. But after the 16th of September, we might start seeing things change for the more active in the Atlantic. But anyways, if you did enjoy this tropical weather outlook and discussion for Sunday, September 1st, 2024, if you found this video very helpful, please subscribe to the YouTube channel, as it really helps out a lot. We're only 20 subscribers away from 26,000. So thank you all for showing your diligent support, leaving comments in the section below, and me trying to get back to those comments as soon as possible. Also, hit the like button and ring the bell notification icon, as I will continue to monitor the deep tropics here. Since we're nearing the peak of hurricane season, I will probably be making videos on this every day as long as there is something to monitor out there in the Atlantic. But anyways, thank you all for watching, and I will be back with you more tomorrow with another update on the deep tropics.